Stop. You don't understand women. You think you do. And that's the problem. You think you're observant. You think you're emotionally intelligent. You think you get the signals. And yet the outcome is always the same. You explain. You adjust. You wait. And somehow, you're never the one deciding how things go. This isn't because women are complicated, and it's not because you're unlucky. It's because you're standing in the wrong position and trying to compensate with effort. Power doesn't work that way. The illusion of understanding. Most men make the same mistake. They confuse attention with leverage. They confuse emotional exchange with authority. They confuse closeness with respect. They believe that if they just understand enough, if they explain themselves clearly, if they stay available, if they show consistency, things will stabilize. But stability without weight doesn't create attraction. It creates familiarity. And familiarity without position breeds contempt. Every explanation is a signal, not of honesty, but of dependency. You explain when you feel your position slipping. You justify when you're afraid of losing access. You chase clarity when you've already lost control. The moment you start managing impressions, you're no longer setting the dynamic, you're reacting to it. Machiavelli, How Humans Respond to Power. Machiavelli never wrote about dating. He wrote about authority, hierarchy, and human nature. And that's exactly why his logic applies here. In The Prince, Machiavelli makes something clear. People do not respond to intention. They respond to position. Love is unstable because it depends on perception. Fear, or more precisely, the fear of loss, is stable because it creates restraint, and restraint creates order. Power does not explain itself. The moment authority feels the need to justify, it reveals vulnerability. A ruler who begs for loyalty loses it. A ruler who appears dependent invites challenge. This isn't cruelty, it's mechanics. And those mechanics don't disappear just because the setting changes from politics to relationships. Translating power into relationships. This is where most men get uncomfortable, because the rules don't change, only the context does. Distance is not absence, it's structure. Distance creates gravity. Gravity creates tension. Tension sustains interest. Closeness without gravity collapses into familiarity, and familiarity without respect kills desire. When you are always available, you remove friction, and without friction, there is no weight. Silence. Silence is not passive. Silence removes certainty. When there is no reaction to measure, people start projecting. They fill the space. They reveal their position. Silence shifts pressure outward. The one who speaks first under uncertainty is usually the one with less leverage. Unpredictability. Predictability feels safe, but safety is not attraction. Respect forms where outcomes are not guaranteed. When your reactions are known in advance, you become manageable. When your position is stable, but your responses are not automatic, you become difficult to control. The central reversal. Here is where everything flips. This is not about controlling women. It never was. Control is a side effect, not a goal. You don't control people. You control your position. And position is built from independence. The moment you need a specific outcome, you surrender leverage. The moment your behavior depends on approval, you're no longer setting the frame. You don't chase, because chasing signals dependence. You don't explain, because explanation signals insecurity. You don't negotiate attraction, because attraction is never negotiated. It responds to structure. Why good men lose. This is the most uncomfortable part. Decency feels good. It feels moral. It feels clean. It feels safe. That's the trap. Decency without position becomes appeasement. Kindness without boundaries becomes compliance. Honesty without weight becomes exposure. Machiavelli warned against this long ago, not because morality is wrong, but because morality without power is ignored. The good man tries to earn respect. The respected man never asks for it. One explains, the other remains unreadable. Cold conclusion. You can continue chasing clarity. You can continue proving intentions. You can continue being understood. Or you can stop participating in dynamics where your position is already decided. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't persuade. It doesn't justify. It waits, and everything else adjusts around it. You don't chase. Machiavelli, how humans respond to power. Machiavelli never tried to make people better. He tried to understand them as they are. In The Prince, he doesn't describe how power should work. He describes how it actually survives. And one principle appears again and again. People respect what does not depend on them. The moment authority relies on approval, it stops being authority. This is why Machiavelli was suspicious of love as a foundation for power. Love is conditional. It exists only as long as expectations are met. But dependence is visible. And once dependence is visible, the balance shifts. A ruler who seeks affection must constantly perform. A ruler who maintains distance forces others to adjust. Machiavelli understood something most men still refuse to accept. Power is not created by effort. It is created by position. And position collapses the moment you start explaining yourself. Explanation is not clarity. Explanation is self-defense. You don't defend a position that is secure. You defend one that feels threatened. Why explanation always backfires? Men explain because they believe misunderstanding is the problem. It isn't. Misunderstanding doesn't destroy attraction. Weak positioning does. Every explanation carries an unspoken message. I need you to see me a certain way. That sentence alone shifts the hierarchy. The one who needs understanding has already given away leverage. This is why explanations feel reasonable, but functionally damage respect. You explain your intentions. You explain your silence. You explain your boundaries. And with each explanation, you lower the cost of access. You make yourself easier to manage. Machiavelli warned that rulers fall not when they are hated, but when they are despised. Contempt doesn't come from cruelty. It comes from exposure, from predictability, from availability, from reassurance. The more legible you become, the easier you are to dismiss. Distance is not withdrawal. It's structure. Most men misunderstand distance. They think distance means absence, coldness, emotional withdrawal. That's not distance. That's disappearance. Real distance is presence without dependence. It's the ability to remain where you are without adjusting to maintain interest. Distance introduces friction, and friction creates gravity. Without friction, everything slides into familiarity, and familiarity without respect is fatal. This is why availability is mistaken for value. When access is unlimited, it loses meaning. Distance restores cost, and cost restores weight, not through manipulation, but through structure. Silence as pressure, not tactic. Silence is often misunderstood as a trick. It's not. Silence works because it removes certainty. When there is no immediate feedback, people begin to fill the gap themselves. They project, they assume, they reveal. Silence transfers psychological pressure outward. The one who breaks silence first is usually the one experiencing discomfort, and discomfort reveals position. Machiavelli understood that authority never rushes to clarify, not because it enjoys confusion, but because clarity given too early hands control to the other side. Silence keeps the frame intact, not as a strategy, but as a consequence of not needing to react. The final shift. This is where most men get it wrong. They think the goal is control. It isn't. Control is what happens when you stop trying to secure outcomes. The man who chases has already accepted uncertainty. The man who waits forces the world to move first, not because he is dominant, but because he is independent. Machiavelli never told men to pursue loyalty. He explained why loyalty follows stability, and stability never belongs to the one who needs reassurance. Cold ending, no motivation. You don't lose power when someone walks away. You lose power when you try to prevent it. Power remains where need disappears, and everything else rearranges itself around that fact. You don't chase. Status is felt before. It is understood. Most men think status is something you build by adding traits, confidence, charisma, competence, words. But status is not constructed from additions. It's revealed through subtraction. What you don't do communicates more than what you do. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't correct every misunderstanding. You don't react to every emotional shift. And because you don't, something changes. People begin to feel a boundary they can't name. Status is not explained. It's sensed. This is why attempts to demonstrate value usually fail. Demonstration implies audition. Auditions place you below the evaluator. The moment you try to show who you are, you've accepted that your position is negotiable, and negotiated status is already lost. The asymmetry that changes everything. In any interaction, one side adapts more. That side loses. Adaptation is not flexibility. It's adjustment under pressure. When you change tone to maintain harmony, you adapt. When you soften boundaries to keep access, you adapt. When you preemptively explain to avoid conflict, you adapt. And each adaptation communicates the same thing. I'm invested in the outcome. Investment is visible, and visibility creates leverage. For the other side, power flows toward the person who can afford not to adjust, not because they're cold, but because they're anchored. Why attraction is not earned. This is where the biggest misconception collapses. Attraction is not a reward for effort. Effort signals pursuit. Pursuit signals inequality. Attraction follows position, not intention. You don't earn it by being better. You receive it when your presence doesn't seek validation. This is why men who do everything right still lose. They mistake effort for gravity. Gravity doesn't try. It pulls. And it pulls because it is stable, not because it moves. Control without control. Here's the paradox most people never grasp. The more you try to control the interaction, the less control you have. Control comes from not needing to steer. When your self-concept is stable, you don't chase reactions. When your life structure is full, you don't negotiate attention. When your direction is clear, you don't fear loss. Because it's uncomfortable, not emotionally, structurally. It requires a life where attention is not scarce. Validation is not currency. Approval is optional. Most men don't live that way, so they compensate with communication, with explanation, with effort. And effort can never replace position. Closing of Part 3. You don't become dominant by asserting control. You become dominant when control is no longer required. When your presence doesn't ask, doesn't rush, doesn't negotiate. That's when dynamics shift. Not because you did something, but because you stopped doing what was weakening you. Morality is the softest form of control. Most men don't lose position because they are weak. They lose it because they are obedient, not to women, not to society directly, but to an internalized moral script that tells them what they are allowed to be. They were taught that restraint is virtue. That restraint earns trust. That restraint makes them safe. What they were not taught is that restraint without power is simply submission with a better story. Moral behavior is not neutral. Morality feels clean. It gives you a sense of superiority without confrontation. It allows you to feel right while remaining passive. That's why it's so effective as a control mechanism. Moral men hesitate. They second-guess their impulses. They dilute their reactions. They don't ask, "Is this effective?" They ask, "Is this acceptable?" And the moment that question becomes primary, power shifts away from them. Because power does not answer to morality. Morality answers to power. Guilt is the leverage point. Guilt is not accidental. It's trained. Men are taught to feel guilty for wanting more, holding ground, withdrawing attention, being unmoved. Guilt keeps them predictable. A guilty man explains himself. A guilty man softens his stance. A guilty man stays longer than he should. And staying out of guilt is indistinguishable from chasing. It communicates the same thing. I don't trust my position without approval. Why decency is rewarded until it isn't. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Decency is rewarded, but only when it is backed by leverage. Without leverage, decency becomes obligation. You're not respected for being good. You're expected to remain good, and expectations erase value. This is why good men are often kept around, but rarely prioritized. They provide stability, not tension. Comfort, not consequence. They are useful, not decisive. The silent agreement you never signed. There is an unspoken deal most men accept without noticing. I will regulate myself so others don't have to. That agreement feels mature, civilized, responsible, but it places you permanently on the defensive. You begin managing reactions instead of setting direction. You anticipate discomfort instead of allowing it. You smooth edges instead of defining boundaries. And slowly, invisibly, your position erodes, not through conflict, through accommodation. Why breaking this pattern feels wrong? Because stepping out of this role triggers internal resistance. It feels selfish, unkind, arrogant. That feeling is not intuition, it's conditioning. You were trained to associate restraint with virtue and assertiveness with danger. So when you stop chasing, when you stop explaining, when you stop accommodating, your nervous system calls it a mistake. It isn't. It's simply unfamiliar. The final cut power does not require cruelty, but it cannot survive guilt. It does not require dominance, but it cannot coexist with constant self-correction. The man who holds position is not immoral. He is unavailable for manipulation through shame. He doesn't argue his worth. He doesn't justify his direction. He doesn't soften to remain acceptable. He lets consequences exist. Most men don't need to become stronger. They need to stop kneeling internally while standing externally. Power returns the moment guilt stops governing behavior, not because you changed the world, but because you stopped apologizing for occupying space within it. You don't chase, because there is nothing to chase. At some point, something becomes obvious. Not intellectually, structurally. You realize that chasing was never about desire. It was about fear. Fear of losing access. Fear of being irrelevant. Fear of standing still while the world moves without you. Chasing was never strength. It was negotiation under pressure. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Why chasing feels necessary. Men chase when their internal structure is unstable, not emotionally, directionally. When your life lacks density, attention becomes currency. When your path is unclear, approval feels like confirmation. When you don't trust your own position, you look outward for signals that you're still standing. Chasing is what happens when you need movement to feel real. But power does not need motion to exist. It needs anchor. The difference between stillness and stagnation. This is where most people misunderstand everything. Stillness is not passivity. Stagnation is. Stillness means your direction is set, your boundaries are known, your time has weight. Stagnation means you wait for permission, you avoid consequence, you fear disruption. Chasing belongs to stagnation, not ambition. Ambition moves forward, not sideways toward validation. When the dynamic fully reverses. Here is the quiet moment no one talks about. The moment when you stop checking reactions, stop managing impressions, stop anticipating responses. Nothing dramatic happens. There is no confrontation, no declaration, no visible shift. But something changes underneath. The interaction no longer needs your input to continue. And that's when the asymmetry appears. Not because you asserted dominance, but because you removed dependency. Why most people never reach this point? Because it offers no emotional reward. There is no praise for restraint, no applause for silence, no reassurance for withdrawal. It requires trusting your position without immediate feedback. Most men can't tolerate that. They need confirmation. They need momentum. They need to feel chosen. And so they re-enter the chase, not because it works, but because it feels familiar. The final reality. You don't stop chasing to gain power. You stop chasing because power makes chasing irrelevant. When your position is solid, attention comes without request. Respect doesn't need explanation. Attraction doesn't need persuasion. You are no longer reacting to the world. The world reacts to your absence of need. Final closing. No resolution. There is nothing to master here. No technique, no behavior, no script. Only a decision to stop trading position for reassurance. You don't chase because you are not trying to arrive anywhere. You are already standing where movement begins. You don't chase